If you want to be a successful illustrator, the next hour and 10 minutes are clips from videos I've made to help you do just that. I've been an illustration agent for almost a decade, working with some of the world's busiest freelance illustrators on thousands of projects with an incredible range of clients. I studied illustration, I wrote a book on the illustration business, and I've been an illustrator for a bit. Over the last few years, I've dedicated myself to one mission: helping illustrators like you build thriving freelance careers faster and with fewer mistakes. If you can't watch it all in one go, no problem, subscribe here and you can find me again later. There's a lot in here, but here are some highlights. Working a day job while building your career, how to create your illustration portfolio, where to learn illustration, working internationally and pricing your work, understanding your clients, assessing your strengths, what to do when it's quiet, developing the right mindset, and saying no to clients. Let me know in the comments which tips are your favourites, and if you want to hear more from me, check out the link in the description. Enjoy! It probably makes sense to define illustration first, and you can get a dictionary definition easy enough, but I'll give you my definition. It's an image with a purpose, other than simply to look nice in itself. A lot of art is made to simply be a beautiful image in and of itself. Obviously, art often has a meaning and a story behind it too, but the end goal of that art is the art itself. Illustrations, on the other hand, have a job to do. Illustrators work with commercial clients like magazines, publishers, advertising agencies, and a lot more. Of course, illustrators also sell prints and art for art's sake too, but I'll focus on the commercial work in this video. Those clients have a problem to be solved, and an illustration is sometimes the best way to do it. So here are a few jobs that an illustration does. An illustration can help explain a complicated idea. Maybe it's an article in a science magazine about some theory about dark matter or quantum teleportation. You can't use a photo for something like that, but a skilled illustrator could make an image that helps the reader understand what it's all about. An illustration can also help tell a story. Children's books are the simplest example. The written words talk about Winnie the Pooh getting in trouble for graffiti in a bus stop or whatever. I don't know much about Winnie the Pooh. Then the illustration on the page shows the scene and helps people imagine the characters. Illustrations are often used to sell products too. Look around any bookshop at the book covers, but also food and drink in a supermarket, or designs on a t-shirt, or adverts for brands. In the olden days, before cameras were invented, illustration was used to document the natural world, animals and plants and maps and that kind of thing. And it's still used that way today, but less out of necessity and more out of a creative point of view. There are plenty more things an illustration can do, but the common theme is that they all serve a purpose and they have a job to do. So if you can get into that mindset next time you set out to draw something, you'll be going in the right direction. Think about what it will be used for and who the client is and what they want the image to communicate. I had a very promising start. I'd already got my first couple of freelance illustration jobs before I left university. Nothing glamorous, but they paid real money. So I was pretty confident. Cocky is possibly a better word for it. There was even a double-page spread on me and my work in Mac User magazine, which is mortifyingly embarrassing when I think back on it, because the picture I sent them of myself was me holding a pint, dressed in a lab coat for some reason. I don't know what I was thinking. I'd worked in bars and restaurants through college, so I had a bit of money saved up. And I'm pretty sure I read somewhere that it was good to have 3 months' expenses, rent, that kind of thing, saved up before going freelance. And that seemed reasonable at the time. How hard could it be to start getting regular full-time work as an illustrator? Easy, right? So when I left university, I quit my job to go freelance full-time. My thinking was that I could do it part-time, but it'll take longer. And there's some logic in that, and I wanted to get up and running fast. But I didn't treat my savings very carefully. I bought myself a new computer and rented a studio, and burned through them pretty quickly. It's amazing how quick money disappears when there's nothing coming in. If I'd have been more careful with my money, it probably wouldn't have been a big deal. But basically, I ran out quick, so I had to go and get another job. And that in itself was a pretty challenging thing to deal with mentally. It felt like a big deal. It felt like failing. I'd set out with such high hopes at the beginning and then just tripped at the first hurdle. Getting a job seemed like going backwards. What's more, the job I got was working behind a bar again, working evenings, and into the early hours. Some people like to do their creative work in the mornings, and some people like to do it in the evenings. Well, I was serving drinks in the evenings and sleeping in late every day, so illustration only got my least productive hours in the afternoons. Working that job sucked out all my energy and creativity and joy, honestly. If illustration is your primary goal, you have to try as much as possible to engineer all the other parts of your life to support that goal. And my job did the exact opposite. So if I could go back and do it again, I would have a day job from day one while I was trying to build up illustration on the side. Ideally something where I could practice my creative skills, and if not, a job that didn't take up too much of my energy, where I didn't have to think too much about work and I could leave work at work. Maybe gardening would be nice. Yeah. So let's look at step 1. Make a portfolio of work that's good enough to get you hired. If you want to make good money as an illustrator and have a long career as a creative, then you have to get really good at what you do to stand out from the competition. You have to master your skill and your style and learn to be a good business person and salesperson, and you have to get good at presenting your work and all kinds of other things. But becoming a master is a life's work, and you can't really get to that point without working professionally with clients. So the first step on that journey is getting your first client. And to get that first client, your work only has to be good enough to get them to hire you. It's not going to be perfect. It doesn't have to be perfect. Just good enough to get your foot in the door or to get you on the first step of the ladder, or whatever metaphor you want to use. But even so, getting to that good enough stage is no easy task. Let's say you want to make a portfolio of 20 images that are good enough to get a client to hire you. Well, you've got to make a hell of a lot of bad illustrations just for practice before you can make something good enough to be seriously considered by a real client. And how long is that going to take? It could be months, could be years. If you don't enjoy the process of making new work and building up your drawing skills, style and software skills, you'll never get to that stage. That's why I didn't make it, because I didn't love that process of practicing and making tiny improvements in each new illustration. You've got to love doing it if you want to stay motivated. Once you start working with real clients, you'll have a whole new set of skills to learn, and you'll get real on-the-job feedback, and you'll discover all kinds of other things that you want to practice too. But up until that point, it really is a repetitive process of practicing your craft and getting it to that good enough stage where you cross over the minimum barrier for entry into the professional world. A lot of people don't make it. They can't push themselves to keep improving for long enough to get there, and they run out of steam and they get frustrated and they quit. Step 2, show your work to people who can hire you or give you feedback, doesn't necessarily come after step 1. It's really an essential part of the first step, and something that you should start doing once you begin to feel confident in your skills. Showing your work to people who can give you constructive feedback is going to accelerate your progress in getting good at what you do. Your opinion of your skills and your work, even if you could have an accurate opinion of your own work, which you probably can't, is just one person's opinion, and that's not enough. You need other people to give you feedback on what's working and what could be improved. Ideally, you'll be asking people who know what they're talking about, like real clients or experienced illustrators. But even getting a critique from another beginner who's at the same stage as you are can reveal ideas that you wouldn't have thought of. Your family and friends aren't likely to be much use, but anyone with an interest in illustration and ideally some experience in it will be able to help. The more people you ask for feedback, the quicker your work will improve. I have a whole chapter on the importance of feedback in my book, The Illustrator's Guide, because I believe it is vital if you want to get good, or even just good enough. This is not about sharing your work on social media. That can be a massive time suck if you let it, and you're not really getting feedback on your work on social media. A like is not useful feedback. I'm talking about sharing your work directly with these people. Email them, try to meet them at events, or ask them if you can buy them a coffee. There's no point sharing work on social media that's not good enough. It's not going to help you. It's not going to get you hired. It's just going to be a source of frustration. Share your work on social media when it's good. That means after you've put in the practice behind closed doors and after you've got feedback from real people. Then it'll be good enough to win you some fans and followers if that's what you want. Until then, it might just be another distraction. When you've been practicing your skills for a while and you're getting some encouraging feedback from people who know what they're talking about, then you can seek out real clients and show your work to them. It's still going to take some time for the right project to come along and for a client to be familiar enough with your work to hire you, but your work will be good enough at that point for them to seriously consider you. Then you just repeat this process of making work and showing it to people until you're busy and you're working regularly as an illustrator. And once you're making some money from your art, go ahead and dive into all those non-essential activities. Get a new website, print some mail outs, rent a studio, upgrade your computer. Once you know you can get a handful of clients to hire you, you know you can get more clients to hire you. Then these things are an investment. Before that, they're an expensive risk and a distraction. 2 steps: make the work and show the work. Boop. So this is how you start and build your first portfolio. Maybe you have a list of different subjects that you want to illustrate in your style, and you tick them off one by one. When you get to the end of the list, you've got one example of each subject. That's a great foundation to build on. You can then either work on a second example of each one of those subjects, or you can add more subjects to the list. It begins as a very broad collection, but it's not gone deep in any particular one of them. Over time, you'll have small collections of different subjects, maybe a few portraits, a couple of book covers, maybe 1 or 2 packaging projects, and some editorial work. And as more time passes and you discover what you enjoy working on the most, and clients begin to hire you for specific things, you'll find yourself going deeper on certain subjects, and others will naturally fall away because you're not doing them so much anymore. The evolution of your portfolio can be a very organic process if you want to be. Let your clients tell you what you're good at and go with the flow if you want to. But most people are going to want to take a more active role in that. So you also do the things that you want to do. But either way, some of those subjects in your first diverse portfolio will disappear over time, just as some of the companies that a finance guy invests in won't perform as well as others, and those funds will be diverted to things that do perform well. As time goes on and you specialize more and more and you get known for one thing, this is when you'll remove some of those old projects that you don't work on so much, and you'll get known for doing one specific specialist thing. I wanted to be an illustrator 15 years ago, and I studied for it at university, which was expensive. Could I have learned everything I learned about illustration at university without going to university? Probably yes. Would I have? Almost definitely not. The advantage of a formal education in illustration is that there's a plan and a structure and milestones. I wasn't a particularly self-motivated learner back then, so I needed that, and I'm fortunate that I had that option available to me. But if you can't or don't want to go that route, you can learn everything you need to know for a fraction of the cost if you know where to look. There is one cost that is high, but it's not money, it's time. It will take a long time, and how long it takes for someone to get good enough to be a professional will vary from person to person depending on their circumstances, priorities, and dedication. So here's step 1. Learn to draw. Get really good at drawing. You could take some classes, but really this is more about practice. All you need is paper and some pencils, and maybe some YouTube videos. This is the foundational skill. Draw people, draw buildings, draw typography, draw your own hands, draw people on the bus, draw yourself in the mirror every day for a year. Draw all kinds of things until you can draw well. This isn't going to be quick, but if you don't enjoy this part of the process, then illustration might not be for you. If you start here and can't get past this stage, don't be an illustrator. Step 2, equipment. If you want to be a professional illustrator, you need professional equipment, software, and supplies. This is going to be your biggest cost, and there's also a learning curve that comes along with it. Whatever software you choose, you've got to learn how to use it, which takes time, practice, and dedication. But you don't need the latest brand new computer. Secondhand is fine, it gets the job done. You don't need a graphics tablet, you don't need an expensive camera or whatever else. Those things can come later. And they will no doubt speed things up for you when you've already learned your skill, but a learner driver doesn't need a Ferrari. They can learn plenty about driving from a Volkswagen Polo. You might be able to learn a little bit quicker on newer equipment, but the time it takes to save up for it will take longer, which means you have to wait longer to start practicing. And the more money you save now, the easier it will be to support yourself when you're trying to turn that skill into a career. The extra £500 you spend on a new computer could pay for your rent for an extra month. That's an extra month you can spend practicing without running out of money. Old, slow, second-hand equipment in the hands of someone who's dedicated and motivated is far better than the latest expensive kit in the hands of someone who's not putting in the effort. Trust me, I know. I spent more money than I needed to on awesome tech, and it didn't make me a better illustrator. My desk setup looked pretty cool, but I wasn't churning out enough work to get good at anything. So when I wasn't getting any work, after a while, I had to start selling all that stuff just to pay for life. A computer or an iPad is a big expense, there's no way around it. But if you look on eBay or somewhere similar, you can get second-hand kit and you can keep costs as low as possible. When you start working professionally and start making a bit of money, upgrade as much as you want. Until then, don't sink too much money into it. Master the equipment you have available to you.
Do you have any tips for newer artists and in how they can become more confident in themselves and their work?
I think one of the biggest shifts you can start doing to build your confidence is to start showing your work. I think that one of the biggest mistakes I did in the very beginning is just to kind of isolating from the rest of the world and thinking that if I put in the work and I work long nights and long days, I would just make it, right? And I think one of the best things that you can do to improve your work and build your confidence is to start showing your work and connecting with other people, right? Because you start getting feedback that you can incorporate in your work. You start seeing how people react to your work. You start also seeing that people likes your work, because as long as you hide it, people won't know that you exist. So I think the best way to start building confidence is by, making those small steps of like sharing your work consistently, and showing up and connecting with other people. Other shifts that made a difference for me, which I know that you mentioned this concept that I share often, which is this shift of like going from practicing and doing work that you never show to anyone to behaving like a professional and creating work, right? This shift from practicing to making. So I always mention that, for those that are just starting with their careers, I think an important shift is to go from, to start behaving as a professional even before you become a professional, right? So a major difference between amateurs and professionals is that professionals do work for clients and do paid assignments, and they start and finish their projects because they have a deadline, they need to invoice their projects, and they need to live from it. So even before you start having paid gigs, if you start behaving yourself as a professional artist, you will start making that shift from being someone that never finishes anything and has a bunch of sketches of a lot of different stuff scattered around your apartment, to becoming a person who has a portfolio and who has their process organized and who is, finishing what they say they will finish. So those are a few things that can help you build confidence as an artist. Ultimately, it's all about like producing a lot of work, seeing how your work progresses, because I think that as you see, when you can look at something that you did 1 year ago and compare it with something that you do today, and you see the big shift in quality, then you realize like, okay, this is working. This is having the things I'm doing are having an impact on my work. So this is how you start slowly building confidence.
I speak to a lot of new illustrators, and the most common questions I get are about prices. It's kind of a mystery how some illustrators come up with their prices, right? I want to read you a short quote here from Ogilvy on advertising. "It is usually assumed that marketers use scientific methods to determine the price of their products. Nothing could be further from the truth. In almost every case, the process of decision is one of guesswork. That's David Ogilvy's book, published in 1983 or 4, I think. David Ogilvy, in case you haven't heard of him, is the founder of Ogilvy and Mather, which is one of the big-time advertising agencies in the world, founded in the 1940s, proper Mad Men era. He was talking about how companies price their products, and since that book was written, I would say that pricing has become more of a science or collection of sciences that inform how big companies price their products. But you know what? If you're an illustrator just starting out, there is a lot of guesswork involved in pricing your work. At the start, you get all the advice you can from books, blogs, or videos, but ultimately, you have to make a guess that the price you're giving is about right for what the client wants to pay. As time goes on, your guesses get more accurate because you've worked with a bunch of different kinds of clients on loads of different kinds of projects, so you get a feel for which kinds of clients pay what. You've built up your own mental pricing guide. I'm afraid there's no quick solution in this video, apart from maybe tip number 1. Experience is really the only way to get more confident in pricing your work. That means you will make some mistakes along the way. You may give too high a price for some clients and scare them off, but far more often, out of fear of scaring them off, you'll give a price that's too low and leave money on the table. Because I've been an agent for a long time now, I've priced up a hell of a lot of projects with different kinds of clients and different illustrators and different styles. That's a large part of my job. Agents get to see the same quantity of illustration projects in a month as an illustrator might see in a year, so we get to know what acceptable prices are much quicker. My guesses of what different kinds of clients' budgets are pretty good at this point, but still not perfect because every client and every project is different. To avoid guessing completely, here's the first tip. Ask what the budget is. It's impossible to know what a client's budget is for a project unless you ask them what it is. Even with clients that look the same, sell similar products in the same places to the same kinds of consumers, they can still want to spend radically different amounts on a project. So if you don't want to guess, ask the question. You can say, what do you want to spend on this project? You can ask, can you tell me your budget? This is tip number 1 for a reason. You should always ask. They might not always tell you, but if they do, then your life just got a hell of a lot easier. And it's not rude to ask. It's just the same as asking about the schedule or what file types they need delivering. It's a question you ask to know if you're a good fit for the project. If they tell you, that's great. You can accept or negotiate. If they don't tell you, then you've got to figure out how to come up with a price. Tip 2, pricing guides. Really, the goal is to give the client a price that's in the right ballpark. It's not so low that you represent yourself as a beginner or somebody who doesn't know the value of their own work, and it's not so high that the client is scared off. You can give a price that's a little bit lower than what they want to spend, or you can give one that's a little bit higher than their budget and still win the job. They have an amount that they want to spend and a price they are willing to spend if you're a good fit for the project, so there are acceptable boundaries. But if you go too low, you may represent yourself as being low quality, and if you go too high, the conversation ends because it's too far out of their budget. This is where a guide like this comes in handy. The Graphic Artists Guild publishes this pricing guide every year, I think, and it's very useful to get a rough idea of acceptable prices in different industries, such as advertising, editorial, music, publishing. It's impossible for a guide like this to give you the exact right price for your work and your style. It's put together using sample data, so it can only ever be a general guide. It doesn't factor in your experience level or how labor-intensive your style is, or any of your other personal circumstances that influence how much you need to charge. It also doesn't factor in what your client wants to spend on the specific project they've sent to you. If you have very little personal experience to draw on, this kind of guide is a great starting point to make sure the price you give is in the right ballpark. You can see what an average fee for a magazine cover is, for example, for a monthly magazine in the US, and then you can adjust from there based on your personal circumstances. One of the best things about illustration, in my opinion, is that no matter where you live in the world, if your work is good, you have a shot of working with any client all around the world. So if you live in a relatively low cost of living area of the world, South America, Southeast Asia, Eastern Europe, India, you could potentially build yourself a very nice life working internationally. This is a real advantage for you. It doesn't work the other way around because let's say an illustrator lives in London. They can't work with some of the rest of the world because their cost of living is so high. And working with clients in South America, for example, there's going to be a big mismatch between how much those clients have to spend and how much that illustrator needs to pay their rent. Working internationally is a way for illustrators from certain parts of the world to really build a thriving career and, you know, make a decent amount of money, but which they probably couldn't do working just locally. God, slippery. I've had 2 conversations recently with illustrators from Eastern Europe, one from Bulgaria, I think, and one from Ukraine. And they both told me something that I hadn't come across before, but it makes sense. They said that clients from, I think, France or the UK or US maybe, had been in touch with them specifically because they were from Eastern Europe, hoping to pay less. Well, not even hoping, expecting to pay less, which is a shame. And I think probably the blame lies at the door of websites like Upwork or Fiverr, who have trained people in higher cost of living countries, let's say, to assume that working with people from Eastern Europe or Southeast Asia or South America is cheaper. And you know what? It is. You know, for all the people that are working on Upwork, I said the blame lies with those kinds of freelance marketplace websites, but there's no blame really. For every freelancer working in the UK or the US whose job is threatened by cheaper freelancers in lower cost of living areas, there are fantastic opportunities for the people who live in those places, who previously wouldn't have had the chance to work with international clients. It's globalization, and it started a long time before Fiverr or Upwork appeared. Previously it was, you know, things like American car companies moving their manufacturing to Mexico, for example. That's now caught up with the creative industries, and I imagine most of the people watching this have actually benefited from it at some point. It wasn't so long ago that you needed to live in a city where you had to go and show your printed portfolio to clients in real life. Imagine that. I have no problem with people choosing to work on Upwork, by the way, or Fiverr. If you need to make a living, why not use your skills and sell them on a website like Upwork or Fiverr? It's a great way to get your work around the world. But the expectation is that your work is going to be cheap, even if the work is good. So it's maybe not the way to have a long career. So if selling your work on those websites offers you a way to provide for yourself and your family, then do it. But perhaps we should see it as a short-term solution. Do it until you can afford not to do it. I'm here at my local youth entertainment zone to talk to you about sports illustrations. This year's an Olympics year, which means marketing agencies from around the world are going to be looking for new and interesting ways to represent sports. If you don't have sports illustrations in your portfolio, now is the time. Even if you don't really like sports, there is something for everyone in the Olympics. Everything from archery to basketball, the horsey one, skateboarding, surfing's in this year. Even breakdancing is making its debut at Paris 2024. Now watch me drop in. If you're not a sports fan, which I'm not really, you could focus on a particular athlete from your home country, or you could focus on a Parisian theme. Word. Youth culture. Sports. Sports. Get some sports in your portfolio. Sportfolio. It's very easy to get wrapped up in your part as a freelancer, worrying about how much money you're getting paid, if you've got enough time to do the work, or whatever else. But as commercial artists, we are providing a service to a client who needs a job doing, and we've got to make sure the client is getting what they want. First, we'll look at what the client needs, then we'll talk about how you can make it a really positive experience for both of you, and finally, we'll look at some of the things clients are going to find frustrating in a project. If you hire a builder, they build what you want them to build, not what they want to build. But they make suggestions on what will work best based on their skills and their experience. You pay for the job to get done, but you also pay for their expertise because they can build better than you can. If your client could illustrate something really good themselves, they wouldn't hire you, so they need your input and creative vision. You're not a builder, of course, you're a creative professional. You want great new work for your portfolio too. That's what's going to lead to more work in the future. So you'll want to put your stamp and your style on the project. So there's a balance to be struck. Both of you working together on a project will make it the best it can be. You understand your craft and what works well, and they share their goals with you so you can provide the best outcome to achieve those goals. Understanding the client's needs. So let's talk about the client's goals first. They want an illustration for a specific purpose, and they tell you what that purpose is through a brief. Briefs come in all shapes and sizes, but generally it'll tell you what the illustration is for, what it's supposed to communicate, what size it should be, and sometimes who it's for. The who it's for part is sometimes left out, but it's an important part. Most likely the illustration is for a client's existing customers who could be users of a product or readers of a magazine, or it's for new people they want to attract to their business. That's what advertising is for. So if the client doesn't tell you who it's for, ask them, because when you know who the project is aimed at, you can more accurately position your illustration to appeal to that kind of person. A client wouldn't be spending money on illustration if they weren't going to get something from it that benefits their company, a return on their investment. Most of the time that can be traced back to them making more sales or attracting new customers to their brand, their book, their software, etc. So if you start with the client's customers in mind, immediately you're going to be able to do a better job for your client by being sensitive to what their goal is. If it's a packaging project, you can ask what kinds of people typically buy the product and what they will find appealing. If it's a magazine, you can think about who their typical readers are and what they like to look at. You should also take the time to look at the client's brand and consider how your work can be a complementary addition to it. If you were to make something that doesn't align with their overall brand, it's not going to resonate with the client or their customers. They're hiring you for your style, so that means they think your style is a good fit for them. That's a good start. But if you adapt your work to fit better with their brand, that's going to be great for your client. And you can tell them that too. If you say to your client, I've chosen these colors or characters because I think they'll resonate with your audience, then you're going above and beyond and they're going to love you for it. You can research the client's brand through their social media, website, existing products or previous advertising campaigns. A lot of companies love to share their brand values. If they're really environmentally conscious or have a focus on giving back to their community, you can discover that pretty easily and reflect those values back to the client in your work. These tools and tips aren't about churning out illustrations mindlessly with no regard for the creative process. It's not about hustling and burning yourself out. Good ideas and great work take time. Everyone's creative process is different. Some are quick, some are slow, and both are perfectly fine. Lots of people struggle to find time for their creative pursuits. If you've got kids or you've got a demanding day job, then a lot of your energy is going to be used up, and there won't be much left for your illustration portfolio. You don't need to wake up at 5 a.m. and work until midnight to make meaningful progress. What's crucial is using your limited illustration time to its full potential. Now, I might not be the typical case. I don't have kids to look after, I don't commute, and as an introvert, I don't spend much time hitting the clubs or whatever. I know I have more free time than most, but 5 years ago, I wasn't using that free time to do anything worthwhile. Since then, I've improved my health and fitness, I've made a bunch of useful YouTube videos and courses, and even written a comprehensive career guide for freelance illustrators. Check out the link in the description if you haven't read it yet. Before we dive into the tips, let me tell you about my friend George. Writing a book never crossed my mind until George did it a few years back. He's one of my oldest friends, and it's fair to say, since school, our lives have taken very different paths. He's a lawyer, he has 3 kids, and he was a bishop at his church. He is a very busy man. And one day, out of the blue, he tells me he's written a book, and I was stunned. How the hell did he manage to do that alongside all his other commitments? The simple answer is, he made the time to do it. You can't do something like that without making it a priority and setting time aside to put the work in regularly. He inspired me. And if illustration is important to you, make it a priority and find the time to make progress. So here's my first tip. When I hear people say, I don't have the time, well, are you sure about that? When was the last time you measured how you're spending your time? Probably never, right? Because only an insane person would do that voluntarily. I use this tool occasionally to get an overview of how I'm spending my time in an average week. It helps me identify where I can make adjustments and find time for what's important. You can do this with pen and paper easy enough, but I prefer using an app called Toggle to track activities throughout the day. I don't track everything, just activities that take more than maybe 15 minutes. By the end of the day, I can see exactly how I've used my time, and I even get a pie chart overview.
If I notice I'm spending too much time watching TV, I know I can cut back on that and focus more on writing or going for a walk, something more productive or worthwhile in other ways. If you want to know what someone's priorities are, including your own, you look at a chart like this and you can see it plain as day. It's very revealing. Now, I should say this is not a typical day because the very act of tracking my time makes me more conscious of what I'm doing and makes me want to use my time more effectively. So it's actually a great motivational tool too. Let's first look at how you can assess your own strengths and weaknesses. First of all, let's talk about why self-assessment is so crucial. You need to be able to see and measure your own skills as clearly as possible so you can have a realistic view of where you are now. But it's probably impossible to do entirely by yourself. We need outside opinions to make sure the way we're measuring ourselves isn't biased. It's very hard to see our own weaknesses sometimes, partly because we don't really want to see them. When you can understand what you're good at and where you might need some improvement, you have a roadmap to getting better at your job, or anything really, but a map is only useful if you know exactly where you're starting from. Here are a few ideas to help you find out where you are now. Review your own portfolio. Go through your past work and identify the pieces you're most proud of. Ask yourself why they stand out. Is it the concept? Is it the technical skill you've demonstrated? Is it the storytelling or something else? This can give you a clear idea of where your strengths lie. Also ask yourself which ones you like the least. That's really important too. Why don't you like them as much as the others? Often those are going to be the older pieces, which is absolutely normal. That means you're improving over time. Next, consider the feedback you've got from clients. Look at the projects that received the best feedback and analyze what made them successful. What did you do well in that project that you could replicate for the next one? Client feedback can be incredibly insightful. Getting feedback from your fellow illustrators can also be really valuable. They can offer a different perspective and point out strengths and weaknesses you might not have noticed. That can be done very informally by sharing your work with your peers and people you trust and asking for honest feedback. And to be clear, I'm not talking about posting work on social media and counting how many likes you get. You should also take some time for self-reflection. Think about which tasks and projects you enjoy the most and feel most confident doing. What aspects of your daily illustration practice make you lose track of time because you're so engrossed in it? These are likely things you excel at and possible strengths. When it comes to identifying your weaknesses, which projects have you found particularly challenging or weren't as successful as you'd hoped? Think about what made them difficult. Was it a lack of certain technical skills, difficulty understanding what the client wanted, maybe a lack of good ideas in the first place, or maybe it was time management issues? This will really help pinpoint areas for improvement. Pay attention to any recurring issues with your work. Do you often struggle with certain types of illustration like character design or conceptual images? Do you find yourself avoiding certain tasks? Or maybe avoiding drawing certain subjects because you're not so confident with them? Recognizing these patterns can really help you identify weaknesses. As you go through this process, write down a simple list of your perceived strengths and weaknesses based on your portfolio review, client feedback, peer reviews, and self-reflection. This will give you a clear visual guide of what you excel at and where you might need to focus on improvement.
Another great free resource for learning career skills is podcasts. I've learned more from podcasts than anything else, hands down. I don't even understand people who don't listen to podcasts at this point. The best creatives and thought leaders in the world put out incredible content week on week on all kinds of subjects, and it's free to listen to. Here are a few of my favorites. Books. Books are cheap, and you can learn whatever you want from them. They're not the best way to learn software, for example, but anything you want to know, and plenty of things you don't know that you want to know, is in a book somewhere. Developing a reading habit or listening to audiobooks is just a good life tip in general. Here are a few of my favorites for creatives. I'll put links in the description.
A personal brand is basically a brand that's built around one particular person's personality. That's how I would describe it.
Yeah. So you would maybe encourage people to show more of their personality.
I think so. I definitely think it's worthwhile doing that if people are working directly with you, if that is the sort of service that you offer. I think this is the same in illustration as it is with design, that your skills and abilities are really important. But I think a big thing that's really important is how you are to work with and whether people can feel comfortable or confident working with you. And so I think we need to invest as much time in sort of giving them that information as, you know, the portfolio and them actually seeing examples of the work. So yeah, I think it is really helpful to show your personality. And I think one of the things that puts people off thinking of personal brands is the idea that you have to share loads about yourself. And I think actually you can get across your personality in a very sort of controlled and strategic way that doesn't have to be you sharing what you had for lunch or anything that you don't feel comfortable with. I think you can be sort of quite clever with how you get that personality across. And again, like different people feel comfortable with different ways of doing that. And I think that's okay as well. Like I've got friends who have got really strong personal brands who don't do any video. Now, everyone would tell you now that video is the way that you should be marketing yourself. But actually, she's really into copywriting and she does a great job of getting her personality across, like through her words. So I think you can find different ways to do it that feel comfortable to you. I mean, building a personal brand is effectively reputation building. So it's building a strong reputation and helping people to find you. For me, I think when I was starting out in my business, the word brand never felt that relatable. Like I always thought of brand as like big corporate companies, like Coca-Cola or Nike. And so I think I just didn't feel any kind of affinity with the word. But I think when I got over that and actually accepted that what I was building was a brand, a personal brand, but it was a brand, that kind of mindset shift really helped me in how I thought about my business and how sort of seriously I took it. And I guess helped me to be a bit more strategic about the decisions I made around how I presented myself.
It's quiet out there. Quiet times happen when you're a freelancer. When you have a few quiet weeks, maybe you reach out to some clients, or maybe you do some personal work, or take some classes, or maybe you just take a break. You're not going to be busy all the time. It's expected, and it's part of the deal as a freelancer. If you plan for it, those quiet periods can be a really good opportunity for you to catch up on all those odd jobs that you've been meaning to do. Take it easy, spend some time with your family, and get into a fun personal project that will satisfy whatever creative itch you have right now. But what if you have a quiet month at the end of a quiet year and there's no end in sight? There's only so much client outreach you can do. What are you going to do when there's simply not as much work around and you're not making enough money to get by? The industry is quiet, maybe the quietest I've seen it in my career. Client budgets are being slashed, advertising agencies are letting people go, illustrators are jumping ship from their agency hoping the grass will be greener on the other side. It sucks. So what do? You do what you have to do. Maybe that means lowering the standard of what kinds of work you take on. Maybe it means living more frugally and cutting your costs. Maybe it means getting a second job. But what it really means is surviving until things bounce back. Difficult times like this come and go. If this is the first time you've experienced it, it probably won't be the last. Sorry. A recession has happened pretty much every decade since the 70s. So if you have a long career in illustration, you'll probably see a few more of these. But after every difficult period, things bounce back stronger than ever. We saw it recently with COVID. The year after was booming. And now we're seeing kind of a balancing out and a regression to the mean after that booming year. But we've also got some other major factors influencing the world economy. When there's any kind of economic uncertainty, companies want to play it safe and make sure they survive. They have to justify every dollar they spend, and they spend less. That trickles down through the ad agencies and creative agencies, and there's very little left for us at the freelancer level. So if what you need to do right now is get a job so you can survive until you can be busy with illustration again, then do it. It's not permanent. It's not a failure. There's no shame in it. It is a temporary solution, and a smart one. The alternative is eating through your savings, or worse, getting yourself into debt. It means you can survive the long winter, and you can do all those things we mentioned, when you can. You can learn new skills and work on your technique and update your website. Make sure you're ready to jump back in when the industry bounces back, even better than you were before. If you're new to the industry, it might mean delaying the start of your freelancing career for a while. But the worst thing you can do is lose motivation and stop altogether. Maybe slow down for a while, but you have to be prepared for when things get better and business is booming again. If you let yourself go rusty, you won't be able to bring your A game when there is plenty of work around.
When there are more illustrators than there are freelance jobs to go around, some people will be busy with work and some won't. So how can you make sure you're one of the busy ones? The way I see it, there are two ways. You've got to be really good at what you do, or you've got to be different from everyone else out there. Ideally, both. In any competitive field, the best jobs and opportunities are limited. Not every athlete gets to compete in the Olympics, for example. You've got to be the best. And best is easy to measure if you're a swimmer or a long jumper. Creative pursuits are a little different though. The best illustrator or the best musician or comedian or actor is subjective. Whoever I think the best illustrator in the world is not going to be the same as who you think the best is. Artists are measured on taste and trends and emotions. When you look at popular musicians in the charts now, are they the best musicians in the world? Hell no. But they have something else that sets them apart from the crowd. They're individuals, they have unique characters and quirks, they have style and they show their interests. I'm not a football fan, so I could be wrong, but it's hard for me to imagine a footballer who's quirky and unique and flamboyant. Who is the Lady Gaga of football, or the Snoop Dogg of lawyers, or the David Bowie of doctors? It doesn't work. In those roles, you have to fit in. In the creative world, you have to stand out. You don't have to be the best to make it as an illustrator, but being unique and memorable and interesting is going to help you attract more clients. This is where supply and demand come into play. Supply and demand is a fundamental economic concept that applies to just about every product or service. Don't fall asleep, because it applies to illustrators too. When a lot of illustrators are competing over a limited number of projects, the supply is high and the demand is lower than the supply, which means there's a lot of competition for those top jobs. And there's nothing new or unique about that. If you go back before email, clients would mostly be limited to working with local artists they had easy access to, and artists would need to live in places where there were the most clients, in big cities. Now, any client in the world can work with any artist from anywhere. But an artist can also, in theory, work with any client around the world. It was competitive then and it's competitive now, but the scale has massively increased. Supply and demand also affects prices. When the demand is low and the supply is high, prices get lower because a client can get those services very easily from lots of different places. Take onions, for example. They grow pretty much anywhere. They're always the same, they're easy to find, and the price is very low. So if you work in a style that lots of other illustrators can do, let's call it an onion style, and clients can find it anywhere, you can't charge a lot for it because they can simply go elsewhere and get it cheaper. When the demand is high and the supply is low, prices are much higher because clients want whatever it is really badly, and it's hard to get, so they're willing to pay more. For example, Rolex watches. Their limited editions sell for up into the hundreds of thousands because they don't make many of them, and people are on waiting lists to even get a chance of buying them. An illustrator who works in a style that is really universally popular and in high demand can only take on a limited number of projects because they're only one person, so their prices can be higher. Let's call that a Rolex style. The onion styles are oversaturated. There's loads of people doing the same thing and competing for work at ever decreasing prices. They struggle to find consistent work and struggle to make a living. For artists who have a Rolex style, they're busy all the time and they've got clients queuing up to work with them, and they make good money and they have to turn a lot of work down.
A fixed mindset and a growth mindset. People with a fixed mindset believe that their skills and talents are fixed and they can't be changed. So they don't try to change. They avoid challenging themselves and they avoid situations where they could fail, and ultimately they'd rather not try. You might know someone who says things like, I'm terrible at maths, or I'm a bad cook. If you grow up saying that to yourself for 20 years, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you say it to yourself often enough, then you'll believe it and you'll make it part of your personality. Someone with a growth mindset, on the other hand, might say, I'm not as good at cooking as I'd like to be. And then they'll go check out YouTube or some other learning platform and try some beginners cooking classes.
They know that their skills can be developed with dedication and practice. They embrace those challenges and don't let the occasional burnt Yorkshire pudding put them off. They look for things that they want to improve about themselves, and they put the effort into improving them. So, let's explore how this can be applied to a freelance illustration career. Embrace challenges. Illustration and freelancing in general is full of challenges. Learning new skills, developing a style, working to deadlines, and dealing with feedback from clients. These things can all be difficult and negative if we let them be. But if we reframe them through a growth mindset, they're all opportunities to learn and to improve. Imagine a professional illustrator who's in their 50s or 60s now. Think about how many technological advances they've had to navigate during their career. When they started out, they probably didn't know how to use a computer. They would have had to go out and sell their work to clients in person because they didn't have an email address when they were at art college. They've had to learn an enormous amount of new skills over the course of their career. And no doubt many people have fallen out of the freelance illustration game with every major technological advance. Some analog artists would have just never got to grips with digital tech and just given up. And just think of all the different software packages there have been over the last decade or even 5 years alone. Each one of those is a big investment of time and energy to learn, and some people just don't. They find a process that works for them and they stop learning. And that is the beginning of the end of their career.
In the creative industries, if you want to get noticed, you have to stand out. If your illustration style is the same as 100 other artists, then you are competing with 99 other people to win a project, at least. If your style is unique and eye-catching, then you have a better chance of winning projects with clients that are looking for what you're offering. You can't please everybody with your illustration style. If you try to appeal to every kind of client, your work will look generic and it won't stand out. Again, I'm not creative enough to be able to teach you how to find your style, but you could try this course by Andy J. Pizza on Skillshare. I suspect that's not his real name, but he's a really great motivational teacher. You can get a free month of Skillshare with the link I'll put in the description. Learning the technical skills and then developing a style is a long process, especially the style, because that will evolve over the entire course of your career. An illustration degree would take 4 years, plus maybe a foundation year before that. So think of the process in terms of years rather than months. If you're motivated and dedicated, you could probably do it faster, but it's definitely not going to be a quick process. The next step for an artist is to create and curate a portfolio of work. These days, an illustrator's portfolio is a website. It used to be a printed folder of your work that you would go and show to clients in real life. But not so much now. You don't need a printed portfolio unless someone specifically asks you for it. The basic requirements for an online portfolio are a selection of your illustrations, maybe with a bit of a written explanation of what the image is about or what it was made for, an about page where you tell potential clients a little bit about yourself and what you do, and then a way to contact you, email primarily and phone too. There's lots more you could add, but these are the essentials. You're showing the work, you're giving people a bit of information about what you do, and you're giving them a way to contact you.
Think about these 3 P's whenever you're considering taking on a project: price, pleasure, and promotion. And ideally, any job you take on will have at least 2 of these 3 P's. Does the job pay fairly, or does it pay really well? If so, that's great. That's what we're all looking for, right? But often the best paying jobs might not be the most interesting. And if a client is paying you a lot of money, they'll want a lot of say in the final outcome. That's where pleasure comes in. Are you going to enjoy working on the project? Sometimes you will, and sometimes you won't. And that's going to be broadly true for the whole of your career. Not every project is going to be exciting and fun. And finally, you've got to consider whether there are going to be some good promotional opportunities as a result of the project. If it's a big name client that you can add to your client list, or if the project is going to be shared very widely and lots of people are going to see your illustrations, that's going to be good for your credibility and will hopefully help you find work in the future. For example, if you're getting a good price for a job and you're going to enjoy working on it, it doesn't really matter if no one's ever going to see it. But if you'll enjoy working on a project and you'll get some great promotional opportunities from it, maybe you can afford to be more flexible on the price. And if you'll get great promotional opportunities from a project and you're going to be paid really well, it might be worth doing even if you won't enjoy it that much. This is a general basic framework you can keep in your back pocket and think about when you get a new inquiry from a client.
I know a couple of creatives who are kind of resistant to sharing too much of their process. They want to keep it. They want to keep it all secret.
Yeah.
Because I guess they think that nobody else can figure out how they do it. I'm not sure that's true. But did you ever feel any resistance to just kind of sharing everything you know?
I didn't. I never felt that resistance to, and I think that's why I'm the way I am and I connect with my audience the way I connect, is because I don't see them as competition, right? Like, and I know that I've gotten this question often, like, hey, why are you sharing your secrets? You know, like you're building, you know, you're giving that all away to your competition or what could be your future competition. And it's like, you know, in a way, I don't think that anyone can do it the way you do it. And that goes for any graphic artist, you know, like people will connect with you not only because you do beautiful work, but also because you are in a certain way, you have a certain story, you speak to the people in a certain way. So they will connect with you for all of these different aspects. And yeah, so I don't feel that sharing my secrets will negatively impact my career. And I get a lot out of it. I mean, and you know about this, James. I think it's so rewarding to see or to witness, you know, someone in your community or someone that you have impacted with your knowledge and the you know, the things that you share, the content that you share in a positive way, and see them like, hey, you know, hear them saying, hey, James, thank you so much for that tip. It really helped me land that first assignment. Or James, you know, I feel a lot more confident with my work and how I run my business nowadays. This is such a rewarding thing, and I, you know, I wouldn't give that away, like, up for anything.
So next, let's talk about how to say no professionally and keep the door open for future opportunities. Even if a project doesn't seem like the right fit for you, it's important to handle the situation like a professional. The way you turn down a job can leave a lasting impression on a client and impact whether they consider hiring you for the next project, which might be a perfect fit for you. If you need to turn down a job, be polite and gracious. Thank the client for considering you and express your appreciation for the opportunity. You can use a standard response like, "Thank you for considering me for this project. Unfortunately, I'll have to say no at this time due to your reason. I appreciate your understanding and I hope we can work together in the future." Being courteous shows that you respect the client and their project, even if you're unable to take it on. This leaves a positive impression and maintains a professional relationship. When you turn down a job, it's a good idea to keep the possibility of future work open. You can say something like, "I'm currently booked, but I would love to collaborate on something in the future. Please keep me in mind next time." Saying something like that ensures that the client knows that you're interested in working with them in a more general sense, even if the current project isn't a good fit. It keeps the lines of communication open for potential future collaborations. And if you've turned a project down, but expressed interest in future work, make a note to yourself to follow up with that client later. Check in after a couple of months to see if they have any new opportunities. And that shows initiative and keeps you on their radar. Maybe you find yourself in a position where you can't do the job, but you know somebody who could be a good fit. Referring another illustrator potentially makes the client's life easier, so you win points for that. And the other illustrator is going to be very happy too. Win, win, win. As long as they do a good job. Don't recommend anyone you don't trust. So to recap, consider the 3 Ps: price, pleasure, and promotion. And make sure any new project you take on has at least 2 of them. Make sure you're being paid fairly for your work, because a low-paying client does not necessarily mean the project will be straightforward. Look out for red flags with clients and reduce your risk whenever you can by asking for some payment up front and getting a signed agreement of the project details. Be clear about what the client can expect from hiring you, what they can and can't do with the illustrations, the revisions included, and the price and the payment terms. If you're satisfied that the client is trustworthy, take all the opportunities you can get and build up your experience and your portfolio and your career.
Don't take on a project if you know you're not going to be able to deliver great work, because it might do more harm than good. If you turn down a project, be polite and be professional. And if the client is worth keeping in touch with, keep the door open for future collaborations and follow up with them. Be clear, be nice, have fun, challenge yourself, and try new things. Are you suffering from imposter syndrome? Or are you just feeling a little bit nervous and you're not completely confident about the situation you find yourself in? One of those is a problem. The other is just an everyday situation. So I wanted to share that with you first in the hopes that it will help you look at it a little bit differently, because it certainly helped me. So we've got a couple of names for it, but what actually is it? I've heard a lot of definitions. Feeling like you're out of your depth is one that resonates with me, but another one describes it as a collection of feelings of inadequacy that persist despite evidence of success. So there are all sorts of feelings we might have when we feel inadequate and out of our depth. Anxiety and self-doubt and low self-esteem and fear of failure, etc. When we're just starting out at something like art, these feelings are expected and normal and possibly justified. But when we progress in our career and we start racking up evidence that we are doing a good job and we're being hired by great clients or getting a promotion or even getting some fans on social media, etc., that collection of feelings doesn't go away. Even if you're making illustrations that are awesome, that clients and fans really love, banger after banger, you still feel like you don't deserve it. Here's a possible reason why. Early in your career, most of what you produce is not very good, whatever you're doing. But eventually, you'll produce something that is good because you've had a lot of practice. But other people, looking at your body of work, will still see most of it as not very good. You may get some actual negative feedback on it, but more than likely, you'll get no traction and no feedback, which seems like negative feedback in itself sometimes. The longer you go, the more good work and even great work you'll produce, and you can start to slowly get rid of the stuff that's not very good from your portfolio. And eventually, your portfolio will be mostly good with some great work in it. This is when people start to notice and praise you for it, and clients start to hire you for it. But because you've been through that process of producing a load of work that's not very good for years, you may feel like all this good and great work you're producing is luck, and you don't really feel confident you know what you're doing. You still see yourself as an artist who makes mostly bad work, who's just on a lucky streak, and it could crumble any time, despite all the evidence that you are good and sometimes great. That's years of mental training you've gone through that tells you that you're not good enough. For a while you weren't, but now you are. It's very difficult to undo those years of mental training. So let's look at the technical problem first, and then we'll try to tackle the mental part. If you can produce something good or great once, then you can do it again, as long as you learn from it. At the start, when you're trying all sorts of things to find your style and make something, anything that's good, you are in an experimental phase, putting things out there to see what works. And that is a good strategy at the start. But once you do make something good and you get some evidence that what you've done has worked, you've got to pause and ask yourself why. What did you do differently in this one that you didn't do in the others? Was it the subject? Was it the style, the colours, the technique, the software? Probably a combination of several factors, plus your consistent practice over time. That doesn't mean you should stop experimenting, of course, but now you have a clue as to which direction might work well for you, and you can lean into it and test it out more thoroughly. You transition from luck into something more repeatable and controllable. I'm not suggesting you turn your creativity into a scientific formula, but if you do your best work in the mornings, continue to do that. If you need uninterrupted deep work time, do more of that. If you come up with a lot of ideas while you're out walking, go on more walks. Notice what works and do more of it. As for feeling out of your depth, I actually think that's a pretty good place to be, honestly. High stakes, you're on the hook, and you have to try hard to keep up. That's got to be better than low stakes where you have no responsibility and everything you do is really easy. So when you start getting hired regularly, at some point you're going to be hired for something that you've never done before, where there's more on the line, and you'll feel pretty nervous about it. But that's when you'll learn the most and advance the most, because you have to. You're stretching yourself. You've got things you can do over here, and you've got things you can't do over here. In the middle, you've got things you can do with a bit of help, and you might have to learn some new skills to be able to do it. It's right at the edge of your skills and experience, but you can do it if you set your mind to it. Then, when you apply that effort and you do a good job and you're hired for something else that's at a similar level,
It's easier the second time round, and you get comfortable there at that level for a while until you're hired for something even bigger and better and more complicated. And you repeat this process until you're working on projects that you couldn't have imagined a few years earlier. Because you go through this process over a long time and it happens gradually, you don't notice the leaps you've made in your skills and abilities. You still feel like the beginner that you used to be. You don't feel like you've earned your spot at this place where you're working on really complicated and well-paid projects and you feel insecure about it. If you felt like you deserved to be there and that you had a right to be working on these big campaigns, that may or may not be true. But you probably wouldn't work as hard and you probably wouldn't feel thankful to be in the position you're in. So that insecurity is actually an advantage. It means you have to give 100% of your focus to doing a good job, and you'll appreciate it more.
And looking back, it seems like I just stumbled from one mistake to the next. So believe me when I say I'm an expert in making mistakes. I think the biggest mistake I made was being too passive in how I approached actually trying to find work. When I was trying to find my own clients, social media wasn't what it is now. Instagram wasn't around, but Facebook was, and I think there were some genuinely good opportunities to find work on there at the time. There were also a lot of online portfolio sites for illustrators where you could upload your work too. So I had a simple portfolio website of my own. I also uploaded work to various online portfolio directories and posted on Facebook regularly too. I put my portfolio online in various places, then I assumed clients would find me. It was a passive approach, and I kept waiting for clients to find me, but that didn't work then, and it doesn't work now. Posting every day on social media seems like a good use of time, but it doesn't actually guarantee anyone who could hire you will see your work. If you want to find clients, you have to be active in seeking them out and sending your work to them directly. With so much competition and noise and distraction online, the chances of an art director finding your work are slim to none. The passive approach relies on luck, which you can't rely on. An active approach where you find clients that may be interested in your style and you send them your work directly by email means they almost definitely will see it. It doesn't guarantee that they're going to hire you, but you're taking the responsibility out of the hands of luck and into your own hands. If you send one email with a selection of your work to a client and you never email them again, you're also relying on luck in the timing of your introduction, hoping that the art director is looking for a style just like yours at the exact time you introduce yourself. Well, that's pretty unlikely. But if you keep in contact with those clients and send them new work every so often, you're again taking luck out of the equation and making it your responsibility to stay in that art director's consciousness and awareness, not so frequently that it becomes annoying, but not so infrequently that they forget who you are. If you demonstrate that you're committed over the long term and that you are consistently improving, when the right project does come along, they'll think of you. The thinking in marketing and advertising used to be that it would take 7 touch points with a consumer for them to take action, meaning they would, on average, only buy a product after seeing it advertised 7 times. Maybe they see it in a TV ad, hear a radio ad, drive past a billboard, and then see it in a print ad in a magazine. When they see it enough and become familiar enough and curious enough, only then will they look up the product and consider buying it. Nowadays, with social media and digital ads being as common as they are, there are even more touch points needed, as many as 12, I think. And this tracks with my own personal experience. I'm not clicking an ad on Instagram the first time I see it. But if I keep seeing it, and maybe I hear it mentioned on a podcast or wherever else, eventually I'll start to think, maybe I should look into this product. So keep this in mind when you're doing your client outreach. One email isn't enough. One email is nothing. It might as well be. It may take a few years of regular contact for a client to become curious enough about you to hire you. It's easy to lose the motivation to keep trying after, 4 or 5 tries with no reply from a client. But what if the 6th or the 7th is the one where they're finally ready to hire you? Don't give up. Take an active approach and don't wait for clients to find you.
Now it's time to think big and consider where you want to be in 5 or 10 or 20 years. As I said earlier, long-term plans are very likely to change, but you're looking up into the clouds and imagining the mountain peaks that you can't quite see clearly yet. Having a vision of what those peaks might look like, though, will put the early years of your illustration career into a meaningful context. Think of it this way. Right now, your goal might be to illustrate something for a brand that you like, and you've worked out a few stepping stones that will help you get there. That's a fantastic ambition, but let's expand it.
If you're dedicated and you work with this goal in mind, you might be able to work with a dream client in a much shorter time frame than you imagine. I've seen it happen. Then what? Well, you've got to dream bigger. Picture yourself in 5 years. You've worked with your dream client, maybe multiple dream clients. That's pretty cool. But that doesn't happen without getting to base camp first, then planning the steps to get there and being consistent in working on those steps. What about in 10 years? By then, your goal could be to have a recognizable personal brand, a style, a portfolio and reputation that clients actively seek out. You don't have to go out chasing clients as much because they come to you for your expertise. Building a personal brand is a worthy long-term goal, whatever field you work in. And the steps could look something like this. You develop your own recognizable, unique style that clients love. When people see the work, they know it's you. You identify a niche that you can excel in. Maybe you can specialize in packaging or book covers or fantasy art for games. Specializing doesn't mean limiting yourself. It simply gives your brand a focus and a specific audience that you can connect with. Throughout your career, you'll be sharing your work on social media and building up a following of fans and supporters who resonate with your work. A portfolio that's inconsistent or unfocused is kind of hard for developing real fans. Some people will like some parts but not the others. But when you specialize on one thing, you find that dedicated core audience who love it all. You'll also build up a network of other illustrators, art directors and other kinds of clients along the way who like what you do. You'll communicate with them regularly, and when you help them out or do good work for them, they'll recommend you to others and hire you when they can. Eventually, you'll get to a point where people start to ask for your advice. You'll become a leader, and beginner artists will look up to you just like you did to your heroes. Offering advice, showing people how to do things and how you got to where you are now will position you as an expert and just add more to your good reputation. None of this will happen overnight, but it could definitely happen in 10 years. And what about 20 years down the line? We have to consider the possibility that you'll get bored of doing client work after a while. Maybe not, if you love what you do. But once you're established as a specialist and an expert, the projects will flow to you and you'll be able to pick and choose the ones that you like the most. But what else could you spend that valuable career capital on? Could you teach others in a more formal sense? Maybe in a university, maybe on YouTube. Maybe you could create your own courses and sell them as your own product. This is not only a separate income stream for you, but a way to give back to the industry and help the new generation get started.
If you've made it this far, congratulations, you are now an illustrator. Just kidding. Remember the 2 most important steps. Make lots of work, then show that work to people who could hire you. Don't forget to subscribe and check out the link in the description if you want to build your illustration career faster. See you next time.